Purnamada Purnamidam Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamidam Shishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. We are still continuing with verses 15 and 16, and we have three passages left of the commentary that Sri Aurobindo has written on 15th and 16th. We've covered a few and 3 are left. Instead of trying to rush through them, we will take them very slowly, one piece at a time in one day. So even if the passage that we read today is short, we'll restrain ourselves and read only one passage today, the longer passage tomorrow, and again the last passage, the one existent day after tomorrow. We'll take it very, very gradually. Okay? Then there will be a little bit of a nice long gap, and then we'll take up verses 17 and 18 and the commentary after that. Before starting, let us read the verses 15 and 16 so that we know what are we reading about, what is this commentary about. Oh, it's page 7 in the little book.
Anjali, let's start Purnamada.
Okay, sorry. Thank you.
No.
I just did the Purnamada, but you want to do it again? Sangeeta, we just did Purnamada.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
No. So we'll read verses 15 and 16. Om Hiranmayena Patrena Satyasya Apihitam Mukham Tav Tat Tvam Pushan Apavrinu Satya Dharmaya Drishtaye. One verse at a time. So, in this verse, he's saying that the face of the truth is covered with a brilliant golden lid. That do thou remove, O fosterer, for this law of the truth foresight. The sun actually stands for the integral vision of the reality. You know, we talked about the integral concentration of consciousness, the multiple concentration of consciousness, and the who's going to tell me? Exclusive concentration of consciousness. So, the sun stands for the integral vision of reality. In the Vedic and Upanishadic languages, whenever we use the word sun, it is used for the integral concentration of consciousness. It does not stand for the sun that we are worshipping, the sun that gives us light and heat. That is only a symbol. So, while we are in the state of ignorance, when we are in the state of ignorance, it is revealed to us that behind you, there is an integral vision of light. Even if you have a small idea, it could seem like a mundane idea, a meaningless idea. But the fact that you got the idea, you must remember that the root of that idea starts from that integral concentration of consciousness. Everything we think, everything that happens, everything has its root in the integral concentration of consciousness that is in Surya. Although by the time it reaches us, it could get distorted, deflected, refracted. But the origin of any idea, any thought, any circumstance is always the integral concentration of consciousness or Surya. And there are 2 ways by which we can reach Surya, by which we can reach that integral concentration of consciousness. And that we studied in the verses 9, 10, 11, when we studied Vidya and Avidya. Now, what is Vidya? Vidya is the method of withdrawal. When we withdraw from everything and we say only one and only, we just concentrate on the oneness and the unity. And what is avidya? The multiplicity. When we are lost only in multiplicity, only in this world and the universe and our life in the universe, then we call it avidya, or the process of enlargement. And when we go into vidya, the process of withdrawal, and together with it into vidya, that is the process of enlargement. Withdrawal, enlargement. Withdrawal, enlargement. Vidya, avidya. Vidya, avidya. Then we will be able to develop in ourselves the integral vision. This is a very important thing to understand, that both vidya and avidya are needed to be able to reach the integral concentration of consciousness. And that we did.
Repeat
Yes.
that. Couldn't hear that bit. What were you talking about? Withdrawal and expansion? I didn't get that bit.
When we go into vidya alone, what is vidya? Vidya is going into the knowledge of the oneness. For that, one goes into a state of withdrawal. Withdrawal from all this multiplicity into the oneness. And when one goes into that oneness, then one withdraws and goes into vidya. But that is also, they said, the Isha Upanishad said, that if we go into withdrawal or go into vidya alone, we will go into a greater darkness. Remember that, verses 9, 10, 11? But that is an important process to withdraw. Similarly, at the same time, we need to go into the process of enlargement. And for enlargement, what do we have to go? We have to go into avidya. That is what we are doing, our multiple concentration of consciousness and sometimes exclusive concentration of consciousness while we are living on earth. And it is only when we go through these two, vidya and avidya, both of them together, sometimes vidya, sometimes avidya, sometimes we withdraw, sometimes we enlarge. Through these two movements, we will be able to reach the integral concentration of consciousness. Right?
Is it about balancing actually of everything?
Yes, you can say that.
Yeah.
That it is balancing both, but one has to do both. You cannot do one and leave the other out, or do the other and leave the one out.
Basically, Isha Upanishad is about balancing of the opposites in all realms of life.
Yes. Yes.
Reconciling, no, Anjali? That's what you mentioned.
The better word is to synthesize.
Yeah.
Also, reconcile is also very good. And it is blending the two harmoniously. Blending vidya and avidya harmoniously in our lives. That we are participating in this world, but we are always conscious also of the oneness. And we sometimes withdraw into the oneness, and with what light we get from there, we bring it back into the multiplicity. Right? That is going into vidya, and then coming into avidya, and then going back into vidya. Today, this integral vision is hidden from us. The integral vision of the Surya or supermind or the sun, what is called in the Isha Upanishad. It is hidden from us by the brilliant ideas of our own mind. Because we ourselves have so many ideas in the mind that it hides the integral vision totally. And even when we rise very high in our mind, as we develop more and more and more, we will discover that between the mind and the vision of reality, there are multiple levels of consciousness. There is an integral vision of reality. There are multiple concentrations of consciousness. There is exclusive concentration of consciousness. And when we withdraw from the exclusive concentration of consciousness and enlarge ourselves, when we withdraw from this, where we had withdrawn ourselves into the exclusive, and then we withdraw from there and we come into the multiple concentration. And that way we will be able to somehow start reaching higher and higher and higher and reach the golden lid. And once we reach the golden lid, then we pray to the sun and we say, Hiranmayena Patrena, that, oh sun, oh fosterer, oh illuminer, you remove this lid. Remove this lid so that all your rays are marshaled and they are bundled together in one shaft and it flows through flows through to me. Right? So we read the second verse, 16th verse.
I have a question. This is Yogesh.
Yes, yes,
In the
Yogesh.
last session, to achieve the same vision of Vigyan, you mentioned that the mind has to be receptive, and that is quietening the mind so that it is like a lake which is rippleless and completely
Yes.
quiet. By
Yes.
being still in the mind, you can achieve. And today we are saying that you can also achieve the same state of Vigyan by focusing both on Vidya and Avidya into oneness and multiplicity at the same time. So there are two particular paths to achieve the goal of reaching the stage of integral concentration of consciousness. Is that
Yes.
two options?
Absolutely, because this is, I was just repeating what we had done in verses 9, 10, 11, that we have to follow the path of Vidya and Avidya both. The verses 9, 10, 11 had said very clearly that if we go into Vidya alone, that is the path of withdrawal. Sorry, if we go into multiplicity alone, where we are expanding our consciousness in this multiplicity of life and very busy with the multiplicity of life, which is called avidya, then we go into darkness. But on the other hand, if we go into vidya alone, if we go into only withdrawing into that quietude where the light falls into our being, but if we go into that withdrawal, state of withdrawal only, then we go into greater darkness. The whole concentration is on the word only. If we do this, we go into darkness. If we do that alone, we go into greater darkness. That is why it is important to be able to blend both of them. And as Gita used the word reconcile or synthesize or harmonize Vidya and Avidya both to be able to reach the Hiranyamayana Patrena, to reach the integral concentration of consciousness.
Perfect.
Right?
Just one more point with it. For
Yes.
individuals that have achieved the state of Vigyan, and you've had the privilege of being with, your guru, he himself was hopefully there. So the question is that the will of the Lord, all of us, the final goal is to be following the will of the Lord. For individuals that achieve the state of Vigyan, like Kirit uncle, were they able to know the will of the Lord for every action?
Well, even if they did, they never said so. So we would never know. But there is for sure a great amount of silence in him. And there was nothing that, at least it seemed so, that there was nothing that used to flow from his mind. Because he used to reach into a great amount of silence. And when he would start dictating, it would just flow from him. And in between the dictation, he would take a phone call, which would last for maybe 10 minutes. And when he would continue the dictation, he won't ask us to repeat the sentence that we had written down. Even if it was a comma or a semicolon, he would just go forward from there without having to hear what that sentence was, where it began from. It was as if there was just a flow that was flowing through him. But he never said so. So,
Thanks.
these are only surmises and guesses and our own ideations. The 16th verse. Pushan ne karshe yam surya prajapatya vyuha rashmin samo tejo yatte rupam kalyanatamam tatte pashyami yo savasau purusha sohamasmi yo savasau purusha sohamasmi. So, Pushan means, O sun. Ekarshe means you are that one great Rishi. Yama is the controller. Surya is the sun or supermind or Vigyan. Prajapatya is the master of the world. Prajapatya Vyuha Rashmin Samoha, master of the world. Rashmin is the rays of light. Rashmin, Vyuha Samoha, Vyuha is marshal thy rays, lead them towards a point. Samoha means draw them together. So, as I said earlier, behind every little idea that we have, there is always a ray of light. There is a ray of light which can be traced back to the supreme light of the sun, to the supreme light of the supramental. No idea in our mind can really subsist if it does not have its connection with the supreme ray of light. But in our consciousness, while it was trickling down from there as a ray, it becomes scattered. So it is the quality of our mind which makes the ray get scattered. Therefore, because we are all the time jumping from one idea to the other, and if we draw our mind, all our ideas of our mind, put them, marshal them together to one point, and similarly every idea, when we draw them together, then we get the totality of the samuha, the one consolidated idea, the totality. And then in this it says, then we will reach that point, then you will reach the point where all the rays of light are united. And then our mind ceases to be limited anymore. Because instead of scattered rays, there is simply sunlight. Tejo yatte rupam kalyantamam tatte pashyami. Then I will be able to see, that te means yours. Kalyantamam rupam. I will be able to see your most blessed form. Teja hayat, it is lusterful. Teja. And this will lead to the integral consciousness, the integrated development of our consciousness. And when I reach that point, then what will happen? Then the realization will come upon me, yo savasaho purusha sohamasmi. Then I reach that realization in which I realize that I am the Jivatman, and I find myself one with that reality, the Purusha, that Atman, that Ishvara, Purusha, Ishvara, Jivatman, Atman, all seem to be the one integral relationship of all of them. And all of that is in oneness. And that I realize, that is the state of realization. Once I reach that realization of Soham. So once this realization is obtained, even when the body falls, even when our body falls, it does not matter, because now the consciousness has become completely united with Soham. There is no need of any birth or death. And then if we choose to be born or we choose to be integrated, it is our free will. And our free will becomes the same as the will of that Purusha. There is no difference between his will and my will. That is the realization that we are hoping to reach one day, and that we are aspiring to reach one day. So now we can read, and we'll read the verses every day. Whenever we read a passage, before that we'll read the 2 verses, so that the 2 verses actually get ingrained in our consciousness. Should we read now? The law of the truth. That's where we had left, right? We had done the lower creation, we had done the higher worlds, the lower creation, the intermediate world. Today we will do the law of the truth. See, in order to understand the truth, what do we need? What do we use? We always use forms, symbols, and we must realize that these forms, these symbols are only representations of the truth. They are not the actual truth. The mistake that we make is to regard the symbols to be the actual reality. For instance, we are using the symbol of Surya. Even Rishi Agrawal is using a symbol because that is the easiest way to understand. But we should not be stuck on the symbol. We must use the symbol as an aid to be able to reach the reality which it is symbolizing. The ultimate or integral truth is well beyond our understanding at present, because we understand only by symbols. But integral truth can be reached with the help of these analogies, with the help of these symbols, if we do not get stuck by these analogies, by these symbols. Now I'm reading from the text. For the face of this truth is covered as with a brilliant shield, as with a golden lid, covered, that is to say, from the view of our from the view of our human consciousness. See, again there is a symbol, and the symbol is of a shield, a lid, which kind of covers the golden light. And this is only an analogy, for we are mental beings, and our highest ordinary mental sight is composed of the concepts and percepts of the mind, which are indeed a means of knowledge, rays of the truth, but not in their nature truth of existence, only truth form. So, since we are mental beings, the best means that we have of understanding anything is through conceptions. We make our own conceptions. We understand something through a conception that we've made, through perceptions that we have. When we understand something, we have a perception. I perceive it in this manner. Now, concept is that there is something as truth which is beyond our understanding. Percept is, what is the perception? That truth that we see, it has a golden face and it is covered by a brilliant shield. These concepts and these perceptions that we have, no doubt they can arrive at the truth, but they are not truth themselves. These are only forms, limited forms, which will lead us to the truth. Clear?
So is it true?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, so is it true for the name and form of God also?
Yes, absolutely.
So,
Poonam.
yeah, so it's just a medium to reach the higher truth.
Yes, absolutely. When we reach the one existent, the third passage that we have to read to finish 15th and 16th, it will say exactly that. That everything is a name and form till we finally reach the Purusha. Right? By them, we arrange our knowledge. Them means concepts and percepts that we have. By them, we arrange our knowledge of the appearance of things and try to infer the truth behind it. Now we arrange, we compare, we analyze, we superimpose one idea on the other, we juxtapose two ideas together simultaneously or close to each other. Does this mean this? Or is this this? So we juxtapose, we superimpose, we analyze. Because our concepts and percepts, they need to do this in order to be able to reach some kind of a knowledge, and the highest is knowledge by identity. When we get knowledge by identity, what is knowledge by identity? When the truth and I have become one. There are absolutely no layers of division between us. What the truth is, so I have become. When we reach there, but for reaching there, we need to clarify our knowledge. We need to understand things. And for that, we need our concepts and percepts. We need our conceptions and our perceptions to keep clarifying the light of knowledge in our mind. The true knowledge is truth of existence, Satyam, not mere truth of form or appearance. But true knowledge is actually the truth of reality, which is well beyond the representation of it by way of forms that we are using. We are using the form of sun, the lid, and so many other forms. But the true knowledge is well beyond the truth of these, beyond the forms. We can only arrive at the true truth if Surya works in us to remove this brilliant formation of concepts and percepts and replaces them by the self-vision and all vision. So the only way to actually reach the truth is by the working of Surya, by the working of that integral concentration of consciousness or supermind, which overpasses sometimes or even dispenses with the brilliance of our conceptions. It dispenses with it. It's nothing doing. It's not needed. Let me give you that ray of light, which is a samuha, which becomes like a shaft of light. And with that shaft of light, all conceptions and perceptions can be removed, because we can have the true knowledge. The light of the true knowledge will dawn upon us. So this can only be done by Surya or supermind or the integral concentration of consciousness of Surya. Now, if we see the analogy that Adi Shankara has given of the rope and the serpent. Now there are two parts. One is that the rope is mistaken for a serpent, which is an error of perception. That's a perception, no? And Adi Shankara ji says that the rope has been misunderstood to be a serpent, and so I'm scared. But what is Adi Shankara ji saying? He's saying that the rope actually is symbolizing Brahman. And Brahman is Maya. Brahman is an illusion. So this kind of a superimposition of truths which are symbolized by something else, they lead to a lot of error. Sri Aurobindo has also criticized these kind of analogies, that if Brahman or Maya, Brahman is Maya or illusion, then how can an illusion be symbolized by something that is solid, that is a rope? So anyway, what I'm trying to just say is that all symbolizations do not and cannot reach the whole truth at the one go. They can only be pathfinders through a method of error and finding the truth, but they can only be aids. For this, it is necessary that the law and action of the truth should be manifested in us. For this, it is necessary that the law and action of the truth should be manifested in us. We must learn to see things as they are, see ourselves as we are. In order to properly understand the nature of the truth and its way of working, we must first learn to see things correctly. Correct perception implies a non-distorted perception of the perceiver, that my perception should be absolutely not distorted. And I should be able to see a non-distorted perception of what I am viewing. When these two are achieved, then we are able to understand the nature of the truth. And what is the nature of the truth? That it is a supreme existence, Sat. And its way of working is the ability of that one to become many. Sat, Chit, Anand have the ability and the potentiality to become many. We must understand that we are actually portions of that one, and that everything else too is a portion of that one. And that one is as much me as it is everybody else, so that my perception should lead me to realizing that I and he and all else are one reality. One and only one. I hope I'm clear. Then I'll go ahead. Our present action is one in which self-knowledge and will are divided. How are we working today? Our present action is one in which self-knowledge and will are divided. So what we know and what we actually do, there is a big division between the two. We start with a fundamental falsehood. And what is that falsehood? That we have a separate existence from others. And we try to know the relations of separate beings in their separateness and act on the knowledge so formed for an individual utility. So, at present, in our state of ignorance, there is a dichotomy in our knowledge and will. So, our knowledge and our actions, there is a huge dichotomy. There's a big gap between the two. What we know, by the time we actually put it into action, there is a huge shift from the knowledge that we know. Why? Because we start from a basic contradiction. And the basic contradiction and falsehood is that I am separate from him and I am separate from the others. And based on these false premises, we construct the relations of separate beings as if they are separate and I am separate. And what do we do? Worse still is that we apply this rule to every situation so that it works for my utility. See the sentence? We try to know the relations of separate beings in their separateness and act on the knowledge so formed. Why? For an individual utility. We use it for our individual advantage. We usurp the truth of oneness and we use it for our own limited and selfish goals. The law of the truth would work in us if we saw the totality of our existence, containing all others, its forms, created by the action of the totality, its powers, working in and by the action of the totality. You want me to read it again? The law of the truth would work in us if we saw the totality of our existence containing all others, its forms created by the action of the totality. Totality is the Surya himself. Its powers working in and by the action of the totality. That all the powers of mine are working by the action of the totality. This truth would work in us when actually it is conceived correctly. The conception should be right. And that is that our existence always, always, always contains all the others. And that our limitations too were created by the workings and action of the totality. Even what is limited in us, that was limited by the action and the working of the Surya. When the powers that are working in us start working as a channel, as a pure instrument of the divine's will, of the totality, of the all, then the law of truth becomes more and more and more operative through us. And for this, we must become vaster and vaster and vaster. To leave our separateness and to live in a sense of unity, we have to become vaster and vaster. We can invoke the goddess Mahati and we can invoke Varuna, the god of vastness. They are so relevant to us at this juncture. Our internal and external action would then well naturally and directly out of our self-existence, out of the very truth of things, and not in obedience to an intermediate principle, which is in its nature a falsifying reflection. Our internal and external action would then well naturally, when would it well naturally? When we start becoming pure instruments, like a funnel through whom the divine's will is flowing through. Our internal and external action would then well naturally and directly out of our self-existence, out of the very truth of things, and not in obedience to an intermediate principle, which is in its nature a falsifying reflection. when we become one in consciousness with the Supreme Being. Which means that the supreme existence and all the becomings, then our individual, when we become one with the Supreme and all the individuals, then our individual action or will is no more a separate action, but it is an action which is in complete alignment with the Supreme Divine Being's will. His Sankalpa becomes an action through us. In other words, we will then perceive to be operating as our will in all the others as well. Then it won't be that his will is being done through me. Then whatever the others are doing, whatever, it could be good, bad, ugly, right, wrong, we will be able to perceive the divine flowing through them, distorted or not distorted. But we will be able to see the divine's will, the divine sanction, or the divine's will flowing through all. We'll be able to see that oneness. For the divine, our separativeness, our divisiveness are also part of his divine plan. We think that only when we see some great being, we are seeing the divine in action. Even that which is crooked, even that which is duritani, that too is the divine sanction which is flowing through a distorted ray and flowing through with his energy and actually being manifested here through that instrument. Similarly, when we achieve that supreme oneness, we find that it is our will which was always working out in all the others as well. It is our will, and only our will. That is the state of oneness that we have to reach. Well, we finished one section and it's only 3:45. If there are any questions for this section, please go ahead and ask.
Anjali, what do you mean by it's our will working in others?
When we reach that final point where I and the divine have become one, then the divine's will and my will are not separate. There is only one will. And that is a final realization that we have to reach. Right? Yeah. Any questions other than this?
Yeah, I have questions.
Was it clear up till now? Yeah, you have another question, Sarita?
I have a question.
Yeah, okay.
The ignorance that we experience around us, it finally comes to the will of the Lord. That means acceptance of whatever is happening in the current moment. And we always talk about prasad buddhi, is what is being explained here. That even if there is ignorance or however anybody is behaving with us, it is actually the Lord's will.
Yeah, there is a difference between his will and his sanction. And it would be better to use the word sanction. As I said in the beginning today, that if there's anything that's being done or any idea that has come, the root of it, even if it goes through a convoluted manner, if you trace it back, the root will be the divine. It may have got convoluted and deflected, but the root is from the divine. So as you said rightly, only difference is you could call it the divine sanction or not, and not the divine's will. That's what Kirit uncle used to say, that the divine sanctions many things, but the root of it, as you rightly said, is the divine himself, the supreme himself.
Perfect. Thanks.
Sarita?
Anjali, actually I needed to have this cleared up. This, when you are talking of the lower three planes, the life on earth.
Yes.
Physical, vital, and the mind, that life on earth. So we are talking about the life on earth, which is our body, our vital, and our mind.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm not able to connect it with the Bhur and the Bhuva and the Swaha.
Okay.
Because I'm understanding Bhur, Bhuva, Swaha separately, And I'm understanding this is life on earth, but how do you connect the two?
It just names. Bhur Loka is a loka of matter.
Which we are in right now.
Yes, this body is matter. This is the Bhur Loka. Bhuva is the loka of the vital, the prana.
But this prana is in us even now, no?
Yes, of course, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's in us, it's everywhere. It's because of prana that the whole world is working.
But this is also a different loka.
Every state is a loka as well.
Consciousness.
When our soul will leave the body, where will it go?
That is explained that after we pass away, we go and then we go to the vital plane and we work out, and we go to the mental plane, which is the heaven and hell.
Yes, which are like heaven and hell, what we understand of it.
Are like heaven and hell.
Yeah. So Bhuva is the prana, and that is a loka also. Bhuva loka. And Bhur Bhuva Swaha. Swaha is the mental loka.
Okay.
And we have a mind. So that mind is always in the mental loka. But once we leave the body, then the soul carries that baggage, and then it has to exhaust it in those two lokas.
So that Swaha and the Bhuva is inside us even now.
I mean, they are not, Swaha is not inside us. That loka is called Swaha.
Okay. That loka, it is there even as presently.
I too am in that loka because my mind is working, and the mind is working in the Swaha loka.
Okay.
But once the soul leaves the body, then it goes purely into the vital loka, which is the Bhuva loka, and then into the Swaha loka.
Okay, I got it. Yeah. Understood. Yeah.
Any other questions? I just felt that we shouldn't rush through reading the second section also. Although we've done for very little time, we've only studied for 45 minutes.
Anjali?
Yeah?
I have some questions, but they are not related particularly to today's teachings. I was going through, the first couple of lectures that you had given about this when you restarted, when I had joined.
Yeah.
That along with the text, and I had a couple of things which I can ask you later also if you want, if it's good.
No, why don't you ask? It would be a help to everybody.
Okay, one I think it's a childish question. I think Yogesh asked something in that area today. I was just wondering, you've said many times Buddha and Sai Baba and so many names you take of these very evolved souls who chose to come back, and Sri Aurobindo, Kirit Uncle, all of them, I mean, what kind of, because I remember when you first did the Gita Vedas, you said that some certain level of consciousness or Sri Aurobindo brought down to earth before leaving. He was waiting for that to come down before leaving his body. Kuch mere ko aisa yaad aata hai. And I want to know what levels are all these various souls working at. Do we have any understanding of that? Because it gives you a kind of roadmap, kind of goal.
Which level they are working at, I do not know.
I don't understand what is in this, who's in the super mind, who is in the other mind, who is in, that kind of thing. Just for us to have a reference.
Yeah, so we've not been clarified that at what level who is working at. We don't know if Buddha has come back or not. And if he has come back, then what level he is working at.
Acha, okay, you can go up and down.
Yeah, we don't know. I mean, this is what Kirit Uncle used to say, and what Sri Aurobindo says, that why should one want to achieve moksha? Why should one want to escape from this world?
That I fully understood. I understood
that. So one would want to come back with a body in an embodied state.
So a person who can come back like that, choose to come back with the knowledge of both the states, is at which level of that diagram that you showed me?
Then he would like to come back in the physical body. So that
I understand that he'll come back in the physical body. What state of evolution in that ladder would he have to be to have that choice?
That's
Actually,
your
Anjali,
question.
I think what she's asking is that
I
when
want.
Gita question, no, how will you define the Sthit Prajna person? What are the characteristics? What does he think? How does he walk?
No. I think Anjali understood what I was asking though.
No, I mean, you're not asking his characteristics.
No.
You're not asking that. You're asking, Kate, what stage would he have reached of consciousness to be able to choose to come back?
Yeah.
That's what you're saying. Well, that is not being clarified anywhere, but it has to be a very, very high level. Not a very high level, but a considerably high level of consciousness to choose to come back. If you've not carried too much baggage with you, and you've been able to sublimate all those baggages very fast in the life plane, in the mind plane. And then when you reach the soul plane, if there isn't much baggage and there's a lot of learning has already been done, then you choose to come back to help. But if you yourself, your learnings are not complete,
then there's no choice.
Then you have to come back to do your own learning. And while you're doing your own learning, you could be
improving and going up a little bit more.
No. You could be simultaneously helping others. Because while you're helping others, you're only helping yourself, actually. I mean, when I try to talk on this, I'm not saying when I talk on this, when I try to speak on these, it is only myself that I'm helping. For me, it is a huge boon to me only, because I myself am on that ladder, just as you are, just as anybody else is. We are all trying to walk that path. So one could be helping even when one is not really reached anywhere much. And those who have really reached, they are of a different level completely. But
and also, other thing I wanted to ask you, Anjali, once you mentioned Chiranjeevis, are they the same as these people who can come back and stay as long as they want and then go back? Have they chosen to be in this world?
There are those immortals.
Like Hanumanji and all.
Hanumanji and others. So they've been chosen to be made immortal. So they are always on this earth helping out people.
So it's two different things actually. They're two different concepts.
Yeah. They've been chosen by the divine to be the Chiranjeevis or the immortals.
And then when you were speaking about Vidya and Avidya, and you were speaking about birth and non-birth, when you were speaking, I felt like I understood everything that you were saying, And then I went back and I listened to it again and I read along with it. And I got a little bit confused. And I don't know if I'm even confused or not, but I just wanted you to clarify.
Yes, why not?
It says that with Vidya, now you tell me that with Vidya you reach immortality, and with Avidya you cross over death. Right? And then the other one, it says that in birth you reach immortality, which means in this world.
Yes.
And with the other one you cross over deaths. So I feel like they sort of cross-wired the two, and I didn't understand that.
They cross-wired the two so that one realizes that not only birth is important. In the second one, by birth you reach immortality. What is the aim of Isha Upanishad? That in our embodied condition we reach immortality. Why they cross-wired the two is that in the second one they say by birth you reach immortality, and in the first one they said by Vidya you reach immortality.
Yeah, exactly. That is my question.
So that you realize that both Vidya and birth, both are important. Avidya, they didn't say reaches immortality. And Avidya and birth are the same.
Correct. That's my confusion.
Yeah, so they're trying to make it important for us to realize the importance of both Vidya and Avidya, birth and non-birth. All are important. If they would have said, by Vidya you will reach immortality, and here they would have said, by non-birth you will reach immortality, then one would have said, then I will just follow the path of Vidya. But they're very smart. They said Avidya is also important, non-birth is also important, Vidya is also important, birth is also important.
So, but Avidya and birth can be equated, right?
Avidya, yes.
They can.
Yes. Because it is living in the multiplicity. with a exclusive concentration and a multiple concentration on the multiplicity.
And then in the 12th and 14th verses, now you use the phrase impulse of nature, that the body will remain, even if you've reached that level of knowledge, then the body will remain here until the current impulse of nature plays out, or something like that, you said.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So impulse of nature is, we've got a body. The body is running by a certain kind of a prakriti. Prakriti yanti bhutani nigraha kim karishyasi. In the Gita, Shri Krishna says that prakriti is running this body and running every instrument of yours in a certain kind of a impulse of the prakriti itself. And till that impulse is over, anyway the body is going to go on running. There is an impulse which is driving, the impulse of prakriti, which is driving the body.
Okay, so when you say this so-and-so person took samadhi, means they were able to overcome that impulse.
They were either able to overcome that impulse, or basically the impulse was over.
Achha. And they just recognized it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
then,
from today's lecture, talk, you were talking about integral consciousness and exclusive consciousness.
And there is a multiple concentration of
consciousness. Where does this fall in the whole, like vidya, avidya, that sort of scale?
Okay. So exclusive concentration of consciousness is like right now, can you think of anything else but what you're talking of on the Isha Upanishad, whatever you're questioning or discussing? You're exclusively concentrated. I mean, you can't think of when you can't think of anything else but exclusively thinking about this, then you can pose so many questions. That is exclusive concentration of consciousness. Multiple concentration of consciousness is, which we do most of the time. And the example that I had given was that you're in the kitchen and you're working.
That baby who's in the jhula and all.
Yeah. So you're doing so many things. Or generally in life, what we are living in is a multiple concentration of consciousness. Right? How did the divine become the world? So how did he hide himself? By exclusive concentration of consciousness. He exclusively concentrated on becoming other than himself. And as he exclusively concentrated, he could hide his higher powers and become lower and lower and lower and lower till he became inconscient itself. Right? So that was exclusive concentration of consciousness. But that is not the truth of the divine. The truth of the divine is integral concentration of consciousness. And that is the highest truth of the divine. The Surya or supermind is actually the integral concentration of consciousness, which includes all in one integral whole of consciousness, where the vidya and avidya, birth, non-birth, the multiplicity and the oneness, all are held together in one expansive consciousness. One consciousness which has become vast like Mahati or vast like Varuna. That is the integral concentration of consciousness.
Got it. Anjali?
Yes?
You know, I was going through my earlier notes, when you spoken about these three, and you have given a very simple example to explain these three.
I wouldn't remember, so please.
In here, see, I'll just put it out so it becomes easy for everyone to understand.
Please.
See, exclusive concentration of consciousness, when we look at an event only from one perspective. Example you gave was someone has said something or hurt you, said something or done something that has hurt you. You are looking at this, oh, this person did this to me and I'm going to react in that. Like you're just concentrating on he said this and he hurt me, or he said something like that. And in multiple concentration, you said when we are looking at it from 2-3 different perspectives, he did this maybe because of this reason or because of, that reason, there could be this. An integral concentration is when we learn to see the complete picture, the divine will behind it. What lesson have I to learn from this event? what was he thinking? His karma was important because I had to grow through this. The divine plan, then when you look at the whole thing, then there is no suffering.
Beautiful. It's a
Notice
very
no
beautiful
word
example.
only.
Thank you so much. I wouldn't remember what I had said
Thank
then,
you.
but
Yeah.
so now
Thank
you
you.
understand. It's a beautiful example that when we are exclusively concentrated and our consciousness is exclusive concentration of consciousness, taking the same example, somebody has said something to me, I'm hurt, and I instantly react. I do not respond, I instantly react. I'm angry and I say something, and that anger grows in me. So that's exclusive concentration of consciousness. And then, as she said, the multiple concentration of consciousness is when one is able to see together with that, no, I must have said this, so he has said this. So I'm able to give it a thought, give some multiple thoughts to it. But I have not yet reached the truth. I have only thought about it in 2-3 different manners. And that would be called the multiple concentration of consciousness. He has said this because I must have said this must have hurt him, or he's heard from something else, and I'm giving it certain. Integral concentration of consciousness is when I am able to see the complete picture in which, and no picture is complete unless the divine has been brought into the whole picture. And the divine's will has been brought into the picture. And when the divine's will has been brought into the picture, and we trace back everything to the divine, then it can be called the integral concentration of consciousness or integral consciousness. Thank you, Sarita.
Yeah,
Such a wonderful reference, my God.
Thank you. It's all your things, whatever you say.
Nothing is mine. Yeah. But your questions were very good, Aditi. Helped clarify so many things. And yours, Sarita. Any other?
I always have
any
so
other
many questions.
Yeah.
Anjali, can I ask you something?
Yeah, Reenu.
Yeah, Reenu this side. See, this is not for, this is not about today. This was about the last, where we were talking about the intermediate world. So see, we had done this on Saturday, and on Sunday I was reading the Ramayana and I came across this line which says, Ubhay beech Shri Sohahi kaisi, Brahma
thoda dheere bolo.
Ubhay beech Shri Sohahi kaisi, Brahma beech Maya jaisi, Brahma jeev bich Maya jaisi. So then instantly it dawned upon me, ki, could this be the intermediate world that you were talking about yesterday? Could it mean that it was the world wherein the Satchid Anand used the Maya as a process to hide himself, to bring us to the lower concentration, lower creations? Because you know, the intermediate word was not very clear to me, because you said yahan pe bhi wohi Satchidanand hai and he knows it, and wahan pe bhi wohi hai, like lower and the higher creations ke beech mein. This line is in between the two. And whereas the properties were same as what you had explained, or rather I understood, because it was not very clear to me. Well, ये पढ़ा तो मेरे को लगा शायद ये है क्या कि ये higher world से जो lower world में आ रहे हैं, तो using the Maya as a process, so this may be the intermediate world. Is that correct?
Well,
or can I understand it that, I mean,
Maya is a term which can be used for the power which the divine used to become other than himself.
Yeah, I understood that.
Yes, you've understood.
What I'm saying, yeah, that
you
is
want
totally
to understand
understood.
What is this intermediate world? That is
you know what I thought, is this the plane wherein he takes upon this Maya, starts using this process to create the lower creations?
Yes, exactly. This is the plane where by supermind there is self-awareness. Satchid Anand become aware of themselves. For example, we would say the mind of Renu is the instrument by which Renu becomes aware of herself. Now, we can't say that the mind is truncated from Renu. It is cut off from Renu. Can we say that? No, it's part of you only.
Right.
But it is a higher part of you. And it is that part of you with the help of which you become aware of yourself.
Yeah, true.
It's not by the vital that you come to know yourself. Right? It is by the help of the mind. So supermind is the mind of Satchidanand. It is by the help of supermind that Satchidanand are able to become aware of themselves and become other than themselves. That is the intermediate world. Because Satchidanand are the higher worlds.
Yeah.
Mind, vital and matter are the lower worlds.
Lower worlds, yes. Yeah.
The intermediate world is this world, the world of supermind, Surya, Vijnana, the integral concentration of consciousness. That is the intermediate, right?
Okay.
But I have not been able to understand the verse from Ramayana till you give it in Hindi.
Anjali, can you just again
sorry, what was your question?
I have not been able to understand the verse of Ramayana that you were reading. So that is it translated?
It is from Aranyakand.
I understand. I've not.
नहीं, अरण्यकांड में एक लाइन है.
हाँ.
तो वो पढ़ रही थी तो मेरे को एकदम से लगा कि could this be?
Okay, but has your question been answered?
Yeah, now yes. Because I tried to create the link between this and what we had read the day before about the intermediate world. I mean, I don't know. Suddenly मेरे को लगा कि शायद यही है कि शायद यही plane है wherein the Maya, he starts using the process to become from this plane to become the multiplicity. So this should, I mean, you know, this kind of explained it to me, or what is this is what I understood. But today, yes, you have it's clear now. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, Sarita.
Can you just once again, you were just saying na these words का अलग-अलग पूषण ने कर्षे का क्या meaning है, यम अलग है, प्राजापत्य. Can you just once again just tell me this word by word?
Okay, just wait on. One minute. Pushan ne karshe, yes. Pushan means O sun.
Sorry?
Pushan means O sun.
O sun.
Sun.
Okay.
Ekarshe means you are that one Rishi, one great Rishi.
Okay.
Yama means the controller. Yama is the one who controls, who ordains. Dharma.
Ekarshe is you are the one Rishi.
You are that one great Rishi.
Acha. Okay.
I think that Karshe, the Rasha, Rishi or something like that, the root word. Okay. Yama is the controller.
Yeah.
Surya is O sun. Prajapatya is the master of the world.
Yeah, okay.
Praja, Patya, Pati. Na, master of the world. Rashmin is the rays of light.
Okay.
Rashmin, view her samuha. So view her is marshal your rays. Direct, focus your rays. Then samuha. Samuha means
the whole.
Draw them together and make them into one shaft. Draw them all together.
Okay.
Samuha, bring them into one samuha.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Samuha. Kalyan tamam tat rupam. Which means samuha.
Tejo.
Yatte rupam. Let thy light, let your rupa be seen. Your teja be seen. Kalyan tamam tatte pashyami. So we can see that most benevolent roop of yours.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, yatte, most blessed form.
The most blessed form of all, of the let me behold.
Okay. And then
yo savaso purushaha, so hamasmi. Yo savaso purusha, the purusha that is there and there. The purusha that is everywhere. There and there means everywhere.
Okay.
Soham asmi, that I am, he am I. Right?
Okay. Thank you.
So I think it was better that we did only one portion. So more questions could be taken and there could be more clarity. We could have covered another passage, but it was better that we didn't cover another passage. We'll do this.
Going through my earlier pages, and then something had asked me to remind you that you wanted to speak extensively about karma before you were going to start the Upanishad, and I'm sorry I forgot to remind you. You said you're going to speak about, give a talk, or I mean one session only on karma. So in case you want to do it after you complete this, then I'm just reminding you.
Okay, we'll think about it for sure. Okay. But karma is one thing that has been grossly misunderstood. Whether we do the exclusive talk on karma or no, we must, since you brought this up, we should answer it right now.
Okay.
That karma has been grossly misunderstood as something that is being done and then there is a punishment or there is a reward. Uske karmo ka phal hai. That is not what is the law of karma. The law of karma is the law of increase.
Law?
Law of increase. Law of karma is the law of increase. Whatever I am doing, that will start getting increased. So, if I'm putting in a lot of my energy in studying the Isha Upanishad, I will get more and more and more opportunity to study more and more and more. Because I put my energy into study. If I put my energy into enjoyment, then such circumstances will come upon my way that more and more and more enjoyment and opportunities of enjoyment will come my way. If I put my energies into just disharmony, कभी इससे लड़ लिया, कभी उससे गंदी बात कर ली, कभी ये करा, थोड़ा सा किया, there'll be a law of increase. And then there'll be more increase. There'll be more increase of that. If we go back in our lives and see our situations and spans of our life, we'll be able to see this law of karma as a law of increase in our own lives. That when we put our energies into one thing, that the opportunities became such that we got more opportunities to become more of that. We got more opportunities to do that in which we put our energies into. Therefore, Kirit uncle always used to call the law of karma as the law of increase. Right? This is a very important point about karma.
So whatever
is so true.
Earlier life, that is nothing to do with like what we say ki wo prarabdh hai and all that.
We can say prarabdh hai, but basically what is a prarabdh? What is a collection of karma? It is a collection of all the learnings that have not been done.
Okay. Yeah.
We can see it in both the ways, but it just helps us to do better karma when we are able to see as those prarabdh wo hai कि हमने जो नहीं सीखा उसको सीखने का opportunity फिर से मिल गया.
Okay.
Right? You were saying something, Yogesh?
On karma, there's always, for anybody who's born in India, the concept of karma is action and reaction. And you're giving it a perspective of, it's like a law of attraction, that the more you engage, the greater would be the opportunity in the same engagement.
Absolutely. That is what Kirit uncle had explained, law of karma, as very clearly. So if it was Kirit uncle who said it, it must be the words of Sri Aurobindo. I haven't read enough of Sri Aurobindo to be able to quote directly from there.
So he never spoke about a reaction. It like the concept of karma that we all are taught within India. It's always about, even the Granth, even the Sikh books say, "E Murak kyun bilaiye, pura likhya paiye." It always comes back saying that, look, what you sow, so you will reap. It's always action and reaction.
Well, you can sow and reap. You can see the whole process of sowing and reaping in just another manner. It's the same thing, but see it in another manner. I sowed a seed of disharmony, which means that I did not learn harmony, right or wrong?
Right.
So I did not learn harmony. So what did I get as a phal? What was the phal? What did I reap? I reaped disharmony so that I could still get another opportunity to become harmonious.
Right.
But doesn't it sound much better as a means of learning than as a punishment? Because
Absolutely.
the divine never punishes. The divine doesn't need to punish. And the divine never tests either. Why should he test us? He already knows who we are, at what level we are, what have we learned, what have we not learned. He's aware of it all. He's fully conscious. He doesn't need to test us. अरे वो तो हमारे को test कर रहे हैं. What rubbish is that? Why should he be testing me? He's not an ordinary teacher. He's not an ordinary parent who has to place a test before us to know where we are. He already knows us. And he definitely doesn't punish. He's a benevolent parent. He loves and loves and only loves. And if we had to describe the divine in one word, it would be love in capital and bold. So he doesn't punish. He gives us opportunities.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. Poonam.
Yeah, so I just wanted to know, how can one indivisible consciousness is actually divided? Like it is indivisible and it is like multifold also. So that's related to our previous talk before karma started.
Yeah. So indivisible. See, the divine has multiple potentialities. If he had, he's illimitable. He cannot be limited. We cannot say the divine can only be that one integral personality. He has a potentiality to become multiple. And he has the freedom. He's a Ishvara. He's the Lord. He can decide to become multiple. He can decide not to become multiple. He is happy if he becomes multiple. He is happy if he doesn't become multiple. It is his potentiality. If he wants to use it, he will use it. If he doesn't want to use it, he will not use it. He cannot be limited in any one manner. We cannot limit him and say that he is the one integral personality. How can he become multiple? How can he divide himself? That is his potentiality. Look at the 11th chapter in the Gita. He shows so many rupas. And then he says, this gambling, that is me. So many negative qualities, he says, that is me. You see, now is there time? There is time, no? Yeah.
There's plenty of time.
Okay. So there is, I'm going to close my book because now we're just talking. Let's look at 3 philosophies. There is one philosophy which says, now these 3 philosophies are talking about God, okay? One philosophy says that there is no God, there is karma. And you have to just go into the good karma and go into compassion and go into the right karma, and slowly and steadily as you get out of doing any karma, and if at all you do any karma, you do good karma, then you will reach one day nihil. You will reach nirvana. You will reach the shunya. This is the Buddhist philosophy, right? This is broadly the Buddhist philosophy. And there is no mention of God there. Then there is another philosophy. And that philosophy, what are you talking about? Who is bound? In the Buddhists, they said that you are bound because of your karma. When you start getting out of your karma, as you start doing more and more compassionate karma and then no karma, you will reach nihil, you will reach nirvana. Now the second philosophy also tries to cover God. So this philosophy says that who is bound? You are no one. I am no one. There is no one. There is only one, that Advait. And you, because of Maya, because of illusion, you think you are. But once you realize that you don't exist. You are looking at yourself, which is an illusion, and your looking is also an illusion. So this is Adi Shankara Ji's Advait, where there is neither you nor me, there is only that Advait Brahman. But there is again no clear mention that the divine has become the many. This is the second. Then there is another philosophy which says that there are two powers. There is the positive power of God and there is the satanic forces, right? And they are both fighting with each other all the time. Ultimately, the divine will win. Ultimately, the divine will win. But for the time being, the battle between Satan and the divine forces is always going on and on and on. And there are two forces. So why is this? Because they don't want to take charge, don't want to give God the charge of becoming the negative, of having become all that is not palatable to us in our vision. This is the Semitic religions, Christianity and Islam. But Hinduism does not try to cover or protect its God. Hinduism says all that there is, Sri Krishna says, all is me. The negative forces are me, but they have all got refracted, they've got deflected, and they've become like this, but I am in control. Nothing is going out of my control. God doesn't need protection from anybody or any philosophy. He says, all that you see in this whole world is me, and only me. There is only me. And then after that, he says, I have become the many. So the different various forms that you see, the negative or the positive, they are all me. And then he says that in all this multiple, I had put my Purnamada, I had put into it. And then I had individualized, like in a river, there are many eddies. Each one of you, inside you, you have the divine soul, the Antaratman, the inhabitor. And that is all of me is inside you. So now I've given you the sanction to do as you please. You do as you please, I will sanction whatever you want to do. But ultimately, today I read in the Isha Upanishad, ultimately, we are all being led finally to reaching the integral concentration of consciousness. Today, tomorrow, day after, whenever it has to happen. But we are being led towards that integral concentration of consciousness. Now, this philosophy is a philosophy which does not cover God, which does not protect God, because God doesn't need protection. Right? So this just came off.
Is it similar to the Advait?
One at a time, I can't hear.
Sorry.
Yeah, Poonam?
No,
Yes,
this is not related to the question, but I just wanted to know, in Sri Aurobindo's philosophy, do he advise awakening of different chakras to empower the psychic entity or Kundalini?
He has said very clearly, if you read The Adventure of Consciousness or you read his letters on yoga, he warns us against Kundalini very, very clearly. It is the most dangerous process of all processes of yoga. Because in the Kundalini, the first chakra that is opened or that is worked upon is the base chakra. What is it called? The Mooladhara. And once the Mooladhara is first open, then one gets into all the a lot of negative forces in the world. And unless one has a very, very powerful teacher, very, very powerful guru, who can guide us through this whole process, there are people who have gone mad or who have gone deeply into the sexual way of life or have become crazy. Sri Aurobindo says very clearly that the way the chakras should be worked upon is first of all the
Sahasrara chakra.
Sahasrara. Because once the Sahasrara starts opening, even if a few petals of the 1,000 petal is opened, the highest light starts trickling in. And the highest light starts taking hold and of your entire yoga. And all the other chakras are then tended to by the higher light and not the base and the negative light. So never ever try to work on the process of Kundalini. These are Sri Aurobindo's directions. Yeah. You were saying something. Your question is answered, Poonam?
Yes, Nanjali, thank you.
Sometimes I think there's so many things that we have to do together. Sometimes I think we should read Adventure of Consciousness together. That would give the entire view of Sri Aurobindo. Sometimes I feel we should just do this sonnets and make it easy, because we've done such heavy work in the last 1.5 years. I don't know when we started Isha Upanishad, but it's been a kind of a lot of reading, copious reading. Yeah. Any
Just
other
one
questions?
question on Advaita. You mentioned it as one of the philosophies which is widely spoken about in India.
Most widely spoken is Advaita, yes.
So they also talk about the oneness, and the concept is that if you are identified in oneness, then the rope and snake example, that what you see of Maya, the existence, it doesn't seem that real. Isn't it similar to what we are talking about? That, look, you need to see both. You need to see oneness as well as multiplicity. In their case, they're saying the multiplicity doesn't have the sting because you are more focused on the oneness, which is similar to what we are saying, that the difference comes to be in the area of multiplicity. How they explain that, right? They say it's an illusion.
Okay. So the difference is a very huge yawning gap, because if there is no multiplicity, according to them, there is no multiplicity, it is all illusion. In the oneness principle, we are similar. But in the multiplicity, since they call it an illusion, there is no real work to be done here, but to escape from here as fast as possible. And the whole process, why would the divine have taken the pains of becoming such a beautiful universe if the aim of this universe was to escape from here as soon as possible? That cannot be the aim of his becoming the many. The aim of his becoming the many was that when he became other than himself, other than the totality, other than the integral concentration of consciousness, when he became through exclusive concentration of consciousness, when he became the multiple concentration of consciousness, the whole idea and the goal behind it was, in this embodied form, we regain the integral concentration of consciousness. And that integral concentration of consciousness has to be regained in this embodied condition. This body has to become perfect. This vital being, this emotional vital being has to become perfect. This mental being has to become perfect. They do not have to be bypassed. In the Advaita philosophy, in the Mayavad, all these have to be bypassed. One has to go into that silence and become firm in the silence, looking at this entire multiplicity as a Maya, as an illusion in which the least amount of work must be done only as much as is needed to support the body. But
just linking it to the 3 E's you always talked about: endurance, equanimity, and ecstasy. So for somebody who's going through tremendous difficult times in the physical world, who's going through pain, who's going through cancer, obviously if he has the 2 options to go into the physical transformation, to go beyond this pain of endurance, to transform it to equanimity and to ecstasy, wouldn't he much rather take the path of Advaita and just say, let me be one and at least come out of this physical pain?
Yeah, so then what he's going to do is, he's going to bypass the pain, not learn the lesson that was meant to be learned. Then he will come back again because that lesson has yet to be learned. So it is better to use all our pain to grow and utilize it for the God-destined purpose. There is a purpose for which each pain comes.
Okay, so no shortcuts.
No, if we take the shortcut, we'll have to come back again with that same pain.
Right.
So might as well use the pain for its real God intended purpose.
In fact, what you're saying now, Anjali, which means the Advaita philosophy has no space for evolution, progress, growth, on reaching perfection. Because if it is not a reality, then there is no way of moving upward and upward.
Exactly, that was my whole problem. I have been to so many teachers, so many swamis, so many gurus before. By
even
God's
the scientific evolution, even if you look at it as scientific, Darwin's theory will not exist if there is no. If you look at it only from the Advaita perspective, then there is no evolution.
There is no evolution. Yeah, even Darwin didn't understand the evolution of consciousness. He only spoke of evolution of form. He didn't understand that there is a principle of consciousness. And it is that consciousness, when the consciousness evolves, because the consciousness has evolved, it pulls a form to a higher form. It is not the form evolves without consciousness. Consciousness evolves and pulls a form to a higher form. So, Yogesh, I hope your question has been answered.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I was just trying to see that while growing up, the bigger or the more visible path of spirituality was always to focus on the oneness. And there wasn't that much of focus on the multiplicity because it was supposed to be bypassed because it's an illusion. That was the concept we all grew up with. But this makes it absolutely clear what you're saying, that it's not the right path because it's a very limited evolution in some which way.
Absolutely. And one just bypasses something that one is supposed to actually involve oneself in and learn from that involvement and grow with it. There is no, as Geeta said very clearly, there is no growth in that. Because who is going to grow? I was always asked by those teachers, who is growing? I said, I. He said, who are you? You don't exist. So I said, but I have this question. You have this question because you're in ignorance. When you will reach knowledge, you will have no question because you will not be there. All this was absolutely weird for me. It was seriously very weird for me. None of my questions were being answered that way. So, yeah. Any other questions?
Anjali, one thing more. I'm actually currently reading this book, Secret of the Vedas.
Ah, wow.
Yeah. So in fact, in this, there is this page in which what you have been explaining all about these the 7 lanes of consciousness in page 7. If you want, I can just send you a picture. Easy, you don't have to look for it. इसमें बहुत ही clearly दिया हुआ है about all that you're explaining. But one question that I had was that Swami Dayanand Saraswati, who was also like very much into the Vedas, and so he was not he did not believe in the murti, the symbols. He looked at them as symbols, the murtis. So I mean, so that is a different school of thought where they don't believe in those symbols. I mean, they look at all the gods as symbols.
Arya Samaji.
They are Arya Samajis, basically. They are, yeah. So Arya Samajis, we have one Arya Samaji amidst us, Amita.
Even Isha is Arya Samaji.
Acha, Isha is also an Arya Samaji. So the Arya Samajis believe in doing a lot of Havan. They believe that the Vedas talked about the Havan as a Havan, only an outer Havan.
Yeah.
And maybe they are taught that actually the outer Havan should finally take them to the inner Havan. Yeah. Because it is the inner Havan which will really lead to an expansion of consciousness. The outer Havan is only a symbol. And so long as it takes us, so long as it has a possibility of taking us towards the inner Havan, then it is of more significance. And the significance is of people joining together and doing things together. That is another social advantage of it. But basically a Havan would be more helpful if it leads us to the inner Havan.
Purification and aspiration.
Yeah. Aspiration, yeah.
Yeah, because it says Veda is for the priests who want to do the yagya, but the Vedanta is for the sages who want to go deeper in.
Yeah.
I just had one point on this Advaita. The fact that millions of people were focused on achieving that state of Vigyan, which is identical to what we are studying right now. How is it possible that they would achieve the state of Vigyan and be at that higher level, which is a bridge between the lower and the higher, and yet not understand the reality? Why would that Gyan within not explain the bigger picture? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. How can you be at that state and still be incomplete?
Yeah, so it is not necessary that everybody has only one life, right? So maybe one spends one whole life in following Advaita to reach that oneness. And when one reaches that oneness, then one realizes that, oh, this is what is left undone. And in the other life, it starts following multiplicity or following integrality. So we're not talking of the span of one life only, right?
Right. Thanks.
So I think it really worked out, huh? Short passage and more questions. So many things get opened.
So this last one the last philosophy that you said, this is the Vishisht Advaita.
Yeah, kind of. It is Sri Aurobindo's philosophy, which takes part of Vishisht Advaita, but clarifies it further. Any other questions? Nisha, no questions from you today?
Anjali, my only question was, I want to do that karma thing whenever we finish with Isha Upanishad, because it's a completely different point of view, the one that Sarita raised.
Yeah, the law of karma is a law of increase.
See, the thing
it is not the law of punishment and reward. That's the basic thing.
Correct.
That's the basic thing about karma. The rest, we've done so much of karma through Gita, through Isha.
I know.
Yeah, but still we'll think about it. We'll try and do that also. But the basic
even if it's
point,
one day.
Yeah, one day. There's so many things in the plate, So we have
Anjali, I also written somewhere that remind Anjali about, you wanted to speak about evil in different religions. I don't know what this is, but it's there in my book. So you wanted to speak about this at some time.
Evil in different religions.
What the meaning of evil in the different religions, but maybe you've already said about it just now.
I think we covered a bit of it today.
Yeah, we have covered it.
Yeah, the most beautiful is what Sri Aurobindo explains, that see, there are two paths. There is the Ritasya Panthaha, the right path, and there is the Riju Panthaha, that which is the straight path. There is the right path, Ritasya Panthaha, and there is the Riju Panthaha, which is the straight path, right? And if we follow these paths, then we reach the divine, because they are the straight and the right path towards the divine. In Sanskrit language, there is no term for sin except, and we've talked about it, except the word Duritani. There is Rijutani and there is Duritani. Rijutani is the straight path, and Duritani is the path that is circuitous, which doesn't take you straight to the divine. How does it take you? It takes you to the divine, but through a very long, curvaceous path, a devious path. So anything that takes you away from the divine is that which is sin, right? Anything that takes you away from the divine is sin, is evil, Nisha. And anything that takes you straight to the divine or takes you on the right path, which will take you to the divine, will be the right thing, which will not be sin, which will be the virtuous action, the right action that takes you straight to the divine. Yes.
Anjali, I wanted to know, Aditi and I had talked about this yesterday. So has any human being or saint or Sri Aurobindo or anybody crossed the supramental level? You would mention this during the Bhagavad Gita once.
The mother reached the supermind.
Okay.
The
But
mother.
That's what I was trying to remember. Yahi baat aapne
Yeah.
boli. हाँ,
But
हाँ.
Sat Chit, has anybody reached Anand Chit Sat?
No, the mother reached the supermind, and she says that one day she actually was face to face with that golden lid. And she says that she saw herself. Can you imagine? She saw herself with a huge golden hammer. And with the golden hammer, she broke the golden lid. And the shaft of light, she says it was unbelievable, that shaft of light. I can find out the date on which this happened and her exact recording of it. I can try and get it, if not the recording.
And Sri Aurobindo didn't reach the supermind? See.
He said that he left the world so that this work could be done by the mother. He said one of them had to leave, and her body was much stronger, and it could take all the travails of this yoga, which is going to be a difficult yoga. So he said he left the body, and so that this work could be done by her. And she actually did it. And she says all children who are born after, I think the date was 1956. And she said all children who were born after 1956 have an access which, if they work on, can reach the supermind. All children who are born after 56 are very special children, she said.
Okay, thank you.
You mean all souls born?
All human beings born after 1956 are very special. See, Sarita is writing every word down. 4 years later, she will tell us, Anjali, you had
But
said
so much we gain from it now. She comes back and tells us at the right moment.
And
integrated
I don't know how
consciousness.
she flags her pages. I mean, in 6-7 years, she
Retrieval is amazing system of retrieval.
Uncanny retrieval. So after 4 years, she'll tell us that on that date, Anjali, you had said this year was the year. It's fantastic, Sarita. I salute you. Salute you.
So it's 29th February 1956.
Thank you. 29th February. Yeah.
Leap year.
That is why. Yeah. And that is why this year it was a very special day. And I said, "Chahe kuch ho jaye, I have to reach Pondicherry for it, for the darshan." And fortunately this year, yes, I was there. So, yeah. Pondicherry, there are 8 cases. It's doing pretty well so far as COVID is concerned. Anyway, we won't go into COVID. We will not wipe it out. Any other questions? Or any other discussions?
Anjali, you've done the Isha Upanishad so well, the birth, rebirth and all that I remember it verbally.
I don't believe this, Nisha.
Yeah, I don't have questions.
This is fantastic, Nisha.
From whatever sessions I did, which was, the rebirth session, the intermediate, the 7 planes.
I enjoyed the rebirth session the most.
So did I.
Yeah,
so did I.
That's the session I enjoyed the most.
I've marked that paragraph.
Okay. Yeah.
On Isha Upanishad, I have no questions. And it's not difficult. Once you've explained it, to reach Sri Aurobindo is not hard.
Sri Aurobindo is at all levels, and I feel that the mastery with which he integrally covers the whole topic, I have not found another writer of that level ever. He just integrally covers anything that he talks about. Phenomenal. So, should we end the session then today? Okay. Om Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevasvashyate ज्ञानमेवावशिष्यते। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। हरिः ओम्। Om Shanti 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 Shanti. 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 Hari Om. Hari Om.